That's what CV stands for. It's Control C, Control V. That makes so much sense. This is the Time on Wing podcast. Welcome back. I'm Courtney Miller with Vigil Approach Analytics. With me, as always, my co-host, Gueric Dechavanne of Collateral Verifications. Gueric, I heard a rumor that we probably have the best guest lineup ever.
Of course.
For tonight.
Of course.
What's
Absolutely.
going on?
We were actually asked by, I believe, our biggest fans. That's what I think is our biggest fans. To do a podcast with us. We actually have two fantastic guests that we're going to have with us that will be doing some of the questioning. I'm sure we're going to ask some questions too. The first gentleman is Brian Rynott, who, if you don't know him, then you should get out of aviation. I really, right?
Then you don't matter.
You know. So Brian Rynott is currently SVP Marketing for Altivair. He was director at Linda Capital Partners. He was also managing director at Alton Aviation Consultancy. He was chief investment officer at Intrepid Aviation. He was VP risk management for AWAS. He was a senior manager, global airline strategy for American Express, which is where I met him for the first time without really knowing it. He's also a senior analyst in revenue management for American Airlines. And he's got a BS in hospitality management from Florida International University, and also an MBA from Embry-Riddle. And our other guest is David Sims. And so for you, those of you that are fortunate enough to know him, you know that he's awesome as well. So David is currently SVP Credit and Investment Strategy at ABL Corp. He was VP of FP&A at AvidBots for a little while. He was also EVP of Investment and Treasurer for Access Investments. He was Director of Aviation Investments at Cross Ocean Partners. He was also Treasury Manager in the capital markets for GoGo. He was Director Investments Financial Analytics for RPK Capital. He was a project manager, group leading engineer at Boeing. Also an associate at Merrill Lynch. He did an internship in Treasury for American Express, which is interesting because that ties him to Brian. And he was also an engineer at Boeing. He's got a BS in mechanical engineering and an MBA from Cornell University.
Welcome, everyone, to a special episode of Time on Wing. I'm David Sims, and today we have something a bit different for you. Typically, you hear familiar voices of our hosts, Courtney Miller and Gueric Dechavanne, guiding fascinating conversations in the world of aviation. But today, we're turning the tables.
That's right, listeners. We are interviewing the Jamie Baker and Mark Streeter of the aviation podcast world. You haven't heard from David and me before on this show, but we're stepping in as hosts for this episode. We've had the pleasure of watching and listening to Time on Wing evolve into a dynamic platform for really insightful discussions. And today, David and I have the ability to shine the spotlight on the two people who've made it all happen, Courtney and Gueric.
These guys have published 38 episodes so far, covering all corners of aviation. And today, we want to learn more about them, their backgrounds, their journeys, and what they've learned along the way since launching the podcast.
And so we're excited to dig a little deeper into their experiences, their transitions in the industry, the challenges they faced, and maybe even a few surprises we'll learn along the way. So Courtney and Gueric, let's start by learning a little bit more about you and your story. And this, my friends, is your Time on Wing.
What's the genesis of this great dynamic duo?
Gueric, you want to tell the story? Do you remember the story?
No, you can tell the story. It's fine. Yeah.
All right, listen. So, before I became a super famous podcast host, I worked for Bombardier, and one of my roles was to work with the lessors, ISTAT, and all that. And there was an appraiser day, and this was at the SMBC offices, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. Is that right, Gueric? Mm-hmm. And as an OEM guy, the first thing I did was walk into this room full of appraisers and other OEMs and lessors. And the second thing I did was walk out of the room when they asked all the other OEMs to step out so GE and Pratt could give their updates on how wonderful their engine programs were performing. So it was awkward. Probably an hour and a half later, we come back in. Like, I know nobody. And literally, it's like the elementary school lunchroom thing, where Gueric was like, "Do you want to share my chicken sandwich with me? You can sit next to me at my table." And I was like, "Cool,
that's
like,
a good
whatever."
friend. That's a good friend.
Truly, that's exactly how we met. Like, and anybody who knows Gueric knows how true that story is, right? I mean, and on both sides. One, just how kind and welcoming Gueric is, but also how awkward I am, right? So truly, now I had recognized you, Gueric, because we saw each other at Ice Tech conferences and that, but that's the first time, the first time I really met you and had the conversation.
Yeah, that was that was the first time we met, and then what? A year went by, or 2 years went by, because you were right, or was it a year or 2 years? I think it was 2 years, right? Because did you go to that? I don't know, whatever it was.
There was another iStat. There were drinks involved. Things were said. You know, the typical iStat story.
True, promises. Well, because the second time was basically right before COVID, right? The second time where, I saw you at iStat. You were doing stuff for Alton for a little bit, but you also had Visual Approach, right? And so I remember showing you one of the products, right, that I was trying to launch right before COVID hit. And you were like, "Man, that's really cool. I'm really interested in what you do." And I was like, "Huh, well, that's interesting that somebody else is interested in what I do. Nobody cares what I do normally." So we just kind of like, "Hey, let's just kind of stay in touch," right? And that was that.
Courtney, I remember meeting you in person. You and I had known each other via email for a few years in various aviation groups and so forth. But I think it was down in Rio de Janeiro, like probably 2009. With our mutual friend Ricardo Baston at the Air Finance conference down in Rio, and very similar to the story of you sitting with Gueric for lunch. I ended up in the lunch line and was looking for a place to sit and stumbled upon you guys, and I had never met you before, so that was a fun experience to connect in Rio.
So many aviation stories begin with two people from the same country met in a conference in a different country, right? Like that's aviation.
Cool. And for the listeners who don't know, Gueric, I think, is probably the only one. He's a very generous person, and everything that Courtney said is absolute Gueric. I think he's the only Delta Diamond medallion in history that has not been in Atlanta. I have yet.
That's true.
To meet
I can't
somebody.
believe we've made it this far through the podcast without reminding our listeners of that fact.
Yeah, it's great.
Courtney, I was just listening to another podcast that you did recently, and you were talking about, about you can go anywhere in the world, but you got to connect in Atlanta. And I'm like, no, that's not true. I know one person who's an exception to that role.
That's because he's in perpetual purgatory.
Yeah.
But what's even better, and the part of that story you're missing out, I didn't mention the Gueric never having been in Atlanta joke. That was Ashwin or Peter. That wasn't even me.
Probably, yeah.
Like it's that ubiquitous. It's like it's just known that Gueric has failed like the ultimate aviation.
At one point I'm going to go to the airport and they're going to be like, "Excuse me, Mr. Dechavanne?" I'm like, "Yes." "You're going on this flight?" No, I'm going to Seattle." No, you're coming with us." "Where am I going?" "You're going to Atlanta. You're going to go through Atlanta. I don't care. They're going to have armed guards basically carrying me to the airplane. You are going to Atlanta."
It may become like one of the new status thresholds, to reach Diamond Medallion.
Haven't been in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Medallion.
So Gueric, for you, like what inspired you, I guess, to choose a career in aviation? Because for those of you that don't know, like you're not an av geek guy, right? By nature. I mean, you're a car guy that has stumbled into a fantastic career in aviation. Like, how did you get involved in it?
So I got interested in aviation because my stepfather was a pilot in the Air Force. He flew C-130s and C-5s. And then he was hired by American Airlines. And then he started a charter company after he was furloughed because this was the early 80s. Mm-hmm. So he got furloughed, started a charter company. They called him back. Then he was doing both. So, when I moved here in '87, and he was aviation all the time, right? So that kind of got me interested. And when I decided to go to college, I was like, you know what? Maybe I want to fly, right? That's kind of, he was doing that. I tried it. I was like, yeah, it seems like it could be fun. So that was my path when I started. Yeah. And, a short summary of where I am, where I went to where I am today, or how I got to where I am today. After I started flying at Embry-Riddle, I was like, oh, this is not for me. I would get nauseous when I was flying. I'm like, no, I can't see myself doing this for a living. Pivot. Yeah. So I did it for a year. I got my private pilot's license. I did it for a year. And then after that, I came home and I was like, this is not what I want to do. And so I just switched to business. And that got me into the finance world of aviation, which was that was my first start with CIT.
Courtney, on you, you mentioned Bombardier, but before that, you were a Purdue guy, right? Was that the kickoff to aviation for you?
Well, look, the true kickoff for me, no kidding, second grade, there was a book in my little elementary school, tiny town in Indiana. Just one book.
One fish, red fish, blue fish.
Yeah, and I wanted to be a fisherman. No. So this book, and I'll never forget, it was written by Arthur Shea. He was the author, and it was What It's Like to Be a Pilot. And it followed this American 747 SP, I think it was, captain, through his day. It was just a kid's book, whatever. I went back years later when I was in high school and looked, and that book had been checked out 24 times, all by me. And I was obsessed, right? I was going to be a pilot from that point on, and that's what took me to Purdue, because I grew up in Indiana, right? So Purdue was actually both my parents' alma mater, so easy school to go to. Taught Drew Brees how to play football. It was a good 4 years, and then Comair. So I flew at Comair for 5 years, and it just took. I'm slower than Gueric. It took me a little bit longer to realize that it wasn't really for me, and then I made the switch to DHL actually, and then Bombardier.
It wasn't your calling.
Did you talk to my simulator instructor? That's exactly what he said. This is for you.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever actually broken the sim before.
So what did you do at DHL before you got into Bombardier?
Yeah, so I left the cockpit when I left Comair. And I joined the network planning team at DHL. So, network planning in the passenger airlines are everything that you would expect. They're building the network. In the kind of express cargo network, we were doing the same. It's just that boxes didn't buy tickets. They didn't reserve space on the airplane. So we were positioning airplanes not really knowing how much stuff would show up each night. So it was network planning. We were positioning airplanes all over. We would launch airplanes empty every once in a while from the West Coast, and have them fly as slow as they could so that we could divert them, and then still, if there were any breakdowns or if there was too much product that showed up, too much demand just for that night, we could recover it and still make the sort, because as you would expect, the overnight business, of course, is lucrative and why we have the airplanes. So that's what I did at DHL, planning with airplanes you may have heard of, such as the 767-200, the DC-930, the DC-940, the DC-863 and 73, the 727. It was that
A-Star cargo
cool
back then?
It was A-Star and ABX. They were ACMI for DHL because of the foreign ownership rules.
Right. Yeah, sure. Fascinating. And Gueric, so, you come out of Embry-Riddle, you're no longer a pilot, or going down the pilot path, you end up at CIT. How do you end up becoming an aircraft appraiser? What's the story from there to collateral verification? To
today? Yeah. So I started, first job that I got was CIT Equipment Finance, right? And so they were financing, it was their corporate jet division, but they had just purchased a kind of a general aviation portfolio of like smaller, like Cessnas, 152s, 172s. And so they needed a couple of sales associates to pick up the slack and just kind of start building that business. So, so I started working there, and it was brand new for them. So it was kind of like just start from scratch. And part of my job was actually learning, I had in dealing with like the credit guys, the legal guys and everything else, like the credit guys were like, look, for every deal that, you bring to me, I have to do research and figure out, what's the real value of this airplane. Mm-hmm. So if you can help me with that and put some stuff together for me, it'll make things a lot faster. And I'll tell you pretty quickly, like what's going to fly and what's not going to fly, right? And plus, you'll also get to know that. And so I actually started using like Aircraft Blue Book, and that was the one kind of publication that we started using. And so I got to kind of know, all right, so here's kind of like the stuff that's what, this is what this airplane is, like what are some of the different modifications, or, how to kind of adjust for the value. But I was still a sales guy. And I did that for a little under a year and a half. And I was like, this is not really what I wanted to do. They were
really good at that, by the way.
What's that?
Deciding moving what around? You don't want to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm great. A
lot of things aren't really for you, are they?
No. I mean, we're almost about a year and a half for this.
No.
Too much work.
Yeah. I mean,
Flights to Atlanta. No.
We're at the year and a half mark for this podcast, so I'm thinking maybe this isn't for me either.
It was about time.
So
you're the only reason this exists. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So at the time, basically doing piston aircraft, you're doing like $15,000 loans. Like the biggest deal I did was like $450,000, and they were looking at us as they looked at the corporate guys, and they were like, "Well, you need to do the same volume every month." And I'm like, "So yeah, that's not going to work."
Like the same volume as the corporate guys.
Yeah. So they wanted us to do $1 million in business every month. And I'm like, $1 million with corporate, with like little airplanes? I'm like, nah, it's not going to work. So I kind of saw the writing on the wall, and I was like, this is not going to be good. And in the meantime, like I had met like all these like aircraft traders, like corporate aircraft guys. And I'm like, man, like corporate aircraft sales, like that's where the money is, right? Commissions. Yeah. So then I looked around, and there was a job opening in South Carolina with Eagle Aviation for a research analyst. And so I got the job over there and started researching, and just started with like King Airs, and then I went into like more of the Cessnas, but so more of the corporate jet side. And that really got me into, kind of the ins and outs of like, all right, what are airplanes, selling for? What are they trading for? What do you need to know? And that part of the job I loved, right? I loved kind of talking to people, figuring out what airplanes are doing, what are the adjustments, what do you need to know? I didn't like the fact that I was on commission. That I was like, being a sales guy, I'm like, that's not really for me.
What is Eagle Aviation at this point? Are they a broker? Are they
no? So they were they did all kinds of stuff actually. So Eagle, they are right at the airport. I haven't looked to see if they still. I'm assuming they're still around, but they had like they had an FBO. They had a little maintenance facility. They had interior shop, a paint shop. And then they also had a flight school. They were like all over the airport, and they also had like an aircraft sales division, which did both corporate and like piston aircraft engines. Okay. And so that's So I worked for with a team of, I think we were like 10, 5 of which were sales guys, 5 were the researchers, right? And so ultimately my job was to try to find airplanes to sell or airplanes for customers for the sales guys. But it was all commission based, and that. I did not like that. So I was there for about a year and a half. And it's at the beginning of your career, right? Yeah. There is a trend. So then I was in South Carolina at that point. I knew that I wanted to go back to Northeast just because where my friends were there, my family was there. And I had a buddy of mine that I graduated with from Embry-Riddle that sent me a job listing with CIT Aerospace in New York. And he was like, hey, can you do this? And I looked at it. I was like, well, that's interesting. So I called my old boss at CIT in Arizona, and I was like, "Hey, what do you think? Like, what do you think about this job? Can you put me in touch with the person over there, because to let them know that I'm interested?" And that was Tony Diaz. And so I reached out, and they had me in for interviews. And at that time, I also had an opportunity with Dassault Falcon Jet at Teterboro.
Yeah.
And so they both made me offers. CIT made me a better offer, and I was like, all right, let me go work for them. And so that got me on the commercial side of aviation, which was new to me.
We were that close, guys.
That
we were
close?
that close.
That close to what?
To avoiding this whole mess.
Oh, I know. Yeah, right. I could have still been in Teterboro. I could be back in France.
Yeah. Oh, that's
And
right.
yeah, so my job at CIT was I was a research analyst, right? So same thing, right? Kind of figuring out. I work with all the appraisers, and I was there to kind of like keep track of trends and put stuff together. I work with all the different divisions of the commercial group, right? I work directly with Jeff Nettle, with Tony Diaz, but then also with the legal team, technical, the marketing team, the asset sales team. So that it was a great experience, right? Because I got to basically touch all aspects of aircraft leasing, and at the same time, I was also doing like internal appraisals. And so from that standpoint, I was there for actually 3 years. But it was actually Damon D'Agostino who, at that point, he knew Scott Daniels. And Scott Daniels was working for BAC Aviation. He was doing kind of appraisals, technical, all kinds of stuff for BAC. And he was looking for somebody to help him do appraisals. And so he had talked to Damon, saying, hey, look, if you know anybody. And so Damon actually kind of reached out to me and was like, hey, look, I don't know if that's something you could be interested in. It's in your neck of the woods. He's looking for somebody. Like, let me know. I'll put you in touch. And so I reached out to Scott, met with him, and I was like, okay, this is kind of an interesting opportunity because I wanted to do appraisals more on a full-time basis, and that was the way to do it. I thought that BAC had actually more stuff behind it to do appraisals, because I was like, oh, great, it's an appraisal company. They're going to have all this stuff. It's going to be awesome, all these models. And so I took the job, which was in New Haven, and went to work there, and Scott was like, all right, so here is the stuff that I've done, all the appraisals that I've done. And basically when we get like appraisal to come in, I kind of look at the stuff I've done and I just, replicate and I'm like, wait, so where's the like valuation models? Where's the publication? And oh, we don't have any of that. That's what you're here for. I'm like,
that's what CV stands for. It's Control C, Control V. That makes so much sense.
That's actually pretty good.
Well done. That is good.
Yeah. So that
because back at this point, Gueric, right? It's BAC as an acronym for the four guys that were the founders of it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I think it was a fleet database, right?
Yes. Yeah. They had it was a fleet database. They also had a consulting advisory firm, and because they had bought. Back in 98, I think it was, they had bought AV Solutions, which was Quentin Brazy, which is now ACI. And so they bought that appraisal business from them. They also had the technical business that was part of it. And so they were just kind of continuing that. But at that point, it was just Scott that was running the whole thing. So he needed some assistance. So when I came in, it was like, okay, we need to be legitimate in terms of all the things that we want to do. Obviously, they wanted somebody to be ISTAT certified as well, right? So I went through that program through BAC. And we developed, a model, we developed the publication, right? And so that's how I kind of started doing stuff, on a more kind of a more legitimate way, as I would call it, just because it wasn't just kind of like, all right, it's an A320. Have you done A320s before? Let's look back and see what we did. And
Control C, Control V.
Yeah, there you go. So to finish my story, I was there for about 4 years, and within that time, BAC was bought out 3 times. They were bought out by Commonwealth Business Media, and then was it 3 times or 2 times? And then United Business
UBM.
Yeah, right? United Business Media. Yeah, and so there were a lot of changes. Scott Daniels left to go work for Rizitco, and they looked at me and they were like, "Great, Gueric, you can just do what Scott used to do," and which was aircraft sales. That's what they really liked because that's where the money was. And I'm like, I'm an appraiser. That's what I do. I couldn't. I tried to say that a couple of times, but didn't really fly. So they were just kind of like, yeah, that's great, but you're gonna sell more airplanes, right? I'm like, oh God, aircraft sales.
I'm gonna ask the question: how long were you at BAC Aviation?
4 years.
And why? Oh goodness, I was gonna say, why was it a year and a half?
Yeah.
No, I was there for
the
4
tenures
years.
are getting incrementally longer now.
Yeah,
I'm seeing
they
it
are.
back, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so within my kind of final year, I had a few opportunities where I met the partners that I had at Collateral Verifications, and there was a project that came through where it would basically fund the creation of Collateral Verifications LLC. And so I kind of saw the writing on the wall. I'm like, look, this is not going to end well, because what they want me to do, it's just not going to work. So I took the opportunity to go out on my own with these guys. We were funded for a little bit, which was great. So at least I didn't have to start from scratch. And while, the foundation was a military project, so while they were doing the military stuff, I was basically focusing on kind of building the appraisal business. And that was 2008. That was August 2008. So It's been 16
Great
years.
timing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that was it, and have never looked back.
And you've built up this entire business basically by yourself on the commercial side.
Yeah. It's been I've been very fortunate with how things have worked out, and it's been a fun ride.
I wonder if we should round out the edges with Courtney just a touch. So you were at Bombardier, and then what? Like, just help us understand how you get to Visual Approach.
Yeah, so I was at Bombardier for 11 years on the commercial aircraft side. I get this question all the time. What work did you do with business aircraft? The answer is nothing. Completely different business. Completely different buying use case, completely different customer base. So it was all commercial, the 3 commercial aircraft programs. Of course, I was so good at it that Bombardier realized they could sell each of those programs at a premium discount. So they sold. They
Say
sold
that second word again. It's just a little bit louder this time.
It was a premium discount. It was a premium discount. Yeah, that's right. It was a much better discount because it's called premium discount.
Yeah, it's a better one. So there was the Dash 8. So the C Series program went first to Airbus. The Dash 8 program then was kind of spun off into Dechavanne, and then I closed the last kind of commercial aircraft CRJ deal to Chorus. There was another deal that was closed by a gentleman by the name of Pierre Gagnon, which was a kind of a business aircraft customer of a CRJ. So I'll give him credit where it's due, and he was a great mentor. But this was in 2019. They announced that team was going over to Mitsubishi. So I said, you know what? If I'm going to do something, I'll take the opportunity. Everything's great. The economy's great. Travel has never been better. Like, it's as stable as it could be. So in February 2020, I'm like, you know what? Psh, I got this. Punched out, right?
Risk-free move.
Risk-free. Like,
Risk-free.
what
Yeah.
could go wrong?
All upside.
Spent quite a bit of time talking with John Ostrower, and of course it's his fault. It's almost entirely his fault. And he brought me on kind of as a contributor to the Air Current writing analysis. Did that for 3 years, and then also started Visual Approach, where I did a lot of advisory work and what we do now. It turns out that March 2020 happened. You'd think the timing was bad. I like to make a joke of it. Timing was actually really good because people didn't know what was happening, and so advice was actually at a premium. And spending time with John, the ISTAT that spring is where Gueric and I sat together again, and I really thought what he was doing was really kind of cool. And then we're just kind of off and running. And Gueric, it couldn't have been a few months after that we were doing JP Morgan webinars together and really just kind of talking about the space. Just kind of jived. I mean, anybody who's ever worked with Gueric knows it's really not difficult to get along with Gueric. So it just kind of worked, right?
No, it did.
Some time.
Yeah. Well, especially because the stuff that you did was very different than my stuff. And so it was kind of like, and so you talked about stuff that I was like, all right, I don't really know much about this. I focused on the airplane stuff, and we were like, oh, that works really well together. We should find ways to work together.
So most people, especially in aviation, only know me either through the podcast or if we're at conferences or if I'm giving a presentation. But what Gueric figured out really early on is I'm actually intensely introverted. And that's not a joke at all. I very much am. So, like, what you don't see behind the scenes of how Gueric and I work together, I don't want to email anybody. Listen, to all the people out there who have sent me an email and are waiting, like, tapping your pen, waiting for that email to come back, I am sorry. It stresses me out.
Yeah.
Keep waiting.
Contact me.
That's
what I would say about that. Just reach out to me.
It's good. It's good for the fan base.
So, yeah.
I mean, Gueric
I will not respond. And if I do respond to you, that's just how important you are. I just want to point that out.
So Gueric's the extrovert, you're the introvert.
In a weird way.
How else did the dynamic work? Like, who's the one coming up with ideas? It sounds like Gueric's doing all the emailing.
No.
Yeah, basically, I'm the office admin.
But
yeah.
But even taking a step back, like, I mean, I think you're underselling the point. When you guys did that JP Morgan webinar, I mean, you guys really were early on in talking about some of the key themes that came out during COVID and still exist to this day, right, on aircraft shortages in the market.
Yeah. So now I know both of you know this very well, but the listeners probably don't. But this is how the relationship with Gueric goes. You're working on anything deep in analysis, really heavy duty thought, laser focus. The phone rings. Gueric Dechavanne. That's Gueric. Hey, Gueric. 3 hours later, right? This great conversation. Couldn't have mapped it. I don't know how we got from point A to point Z, but we did. And nobody came. Well, I mean, eventually one of us came up with the ideas, but usually it's Gueric calling me like, "Hey, what if we do this?" And me going, sounds dumb. He's like, "Okay."
Basically,
later, hey, what do you think about this? And I'm like, "That's stupid." And then an hour later he calls, "What do you think about this?" I'm like, "Yeah, I don't like it either, but that first one was actually kind of good now that I think about it." And whatever. I mean, that truly, that's how the podcast started, right? How many times did you call me? You're like, let's do a podcast. Yeah. Now, I've done podcasts in the past, so not many people would necessarily know that the first podcast that I did was called Airplane Geeks Podcast. This was like in 2007. I reached out to a guy blindly, and we started the Airplane Geeks Podcast. That is still going today. So the Airplane Geeks Podcast continues today, obviously, without me. So it's like gotten way better. So when Gueric hit me up, he's like, "Hey, we should do a podcast." I'm like, "Look, man, that's a lot of work. It doesn't make money." And he said, fine. Calls back a couple days later. We should really do a podcast. And I'm like, no. And I told the story before on the podcast, but truly what convinced me to do the podcast was really kind of the nature of what we're trying to achieve with this podcast, which is not to make money. This isn't a marketing thing. This is truly to just meet people. To be, I mean, from a selfish perspective, I think the way you put it to me was, think about if we could just have a meeting. Think of the people we would like to have a meeting with. Mm-hmm. What we would go through to have a meeting with these people. We'd probably book a ticket. An airplane ticket, and go and meet these people and spend a couple days on the road to meet these people. If we have a podcast, they come to us. And so the purpose of the podcast was only for ever really 3 people to listen to it, right? The 2 of us and the third person, and anybody else who did was all gravy. And now we can't go to a conference without somebody saying, the first time in Dublin, I got stopped. I was walking with Gueric. We were on to our next meeting because now we kind of do all our meetings together. Pulled me aside on the street, which in Dublin, I mean, we're all in the streets. It's all aviation finance everywhere. Pulled me aside. Hey, aren't you Courtney from the podcast? And Gueric's standing right there. Yes, I am. I'm pretty sure he handed you his coat so he could take a selfie with me. It didn't take like a month and we were at ISTAT in Austin, and somebody did the exact same thing to me. So we were even. And I can't even claim to be.
What you're saying is next January, somebody's got to go to Gueric then and ask for the
They already
selfie.
have. That's already happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
so maybe the question's for Gueric then. I mean, you kept thinking and pushing on this idea. Did you think that there was some gap or void, or was it just, just as Courtney put it, just like, what a great opportunity just to meet people, like regardless of where the market is, regardless of, industry experts having conversations and there being a potential void. Did you just catered to the idea of like, I'll just be a little self-serving and like, it's just interesting. I just want to do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I really enjoyed was the conversations that Courtney and I were having, or that you guys and when we have conversations about what's going on in the market, I was like that's really interesting. I'm like, I love those because it's always like, we know so much about the industry. It's always a great discussion, and I learned something. But I'm like, but it can't just be us. It can't just be the two of us talking about stuff, because then that just gets boring. And I'm like, how great would it be to actually have guests on the show? And you can also, I mean, there's so many awesome people in the industry that have tremendous backgrounds, right? And that's what I love about, like, the stories, right? All the people that I've worked with, all the stories that you hear, how they got started, all that stuff, you're just kind of like, that is so cool. So I'm like, how great would it be, to just have the opportunity to meet some fantastic people with great backgrounds, and then also use that as an opportunity to talk about what's going on today, because they're knowledgeable, they know what's going on. And so, so I was like, it doesn't need to be about, it was never like, oh yeah, we can like monetize this, right? It was just more like, no, let's talk to people about what's going on, right? And you get to hear about their great stories, because people leave the industry and then all of a sudden it's kind of like, oh, remember this guy? Like, and right, nobody knows anything. So I was like, that would be fun. That would be something that would be fun to do. And so I kept harassing him, because he was like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, the editing is going to be a lot, and blah, blah. And then finally it was December.
Yeah, December. I might have to email someone.
That was the deal, though.
Yeah.
But seriously, that was the deal. Fine, I'll take on the technical stuff. You email all the people.
Yeah.
And anybody who's been on a podcast knows, like, they're sending emails to both of us, right? And these are people that I know well, that I've worked with, and I just Garic's got this. Don't make me click that keyboard. It stresses me out.
Yeah.
But I think you guys,
Gueric, so this wasn't like, okay, let's do this for 39 or whatever episodes. I said, all right, fine, let's do 10.
Yeah.
And then we'll reassess, like, how are we liking it? And I think about the 20th episode, you're like, hey, were we ever going to reassess? We're like, crap.
Yeah.
it's too late for that.
Yeah.
What I love about the podcast is you guys put out a really refreshing view of things by having, I think, a wide variety of aviation executives come on the podcast. They share their perspective, they share their background. It's really good for listeners and people that are in the industry to kind of understand not just current views, but how a lot of people just got to where they are, right, professionally, and in the variety of backgrounds. I mean, one of the things I wanted to ask of you guys is, in your interviews, what are the common traits or skills that you've observed in the leaders, that you've interviewed that make for successful leadership in the industry?
So 100% of the guests are willing to do podcasts. So there's a lot of correlation there.
Yeah, that's a great.
Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that doesn't lead to success. Although it seems like all of our guests are now all of a sudden open to work. I don't know. It's yeah. No, so I will say, what it comes down to, like, everybody that we talk to, they all say it's all about the people, right? It's all about the people that you surround yourself with, the people that you know. And it's always been through, I worked with this person and I did this and it worked really well and it pushed me into the next thing. Mm-hmm. And so to me, that's just and I think it's just, obviously it's part of the industry. It's also why I do what I do and why I have the business that I have. Yeah, it's all relationships. It really comes down to the people that you meet along the way. And because you just never know what opportunity you're going to have with the people that you meet, right? And I think the relationship that I have with Courtney and how like all the stuff that we're doing now, like yeah, if I hadn't met Courtney, I wouldn't be doing half the stuff that I'm doing today. All right,
Yeah,
so
proactively investing
yeah,
in the relationships and the people and growing your network and staying connected in the industry.
Look, aviation is the only industry where you can name drop, and it's not name dropping. Like, we all know these people, right? Like, anybody will tell a story and names will just start flying because the memories are directly associated, right? This wasn't, a famous person they saw. These are all people who've worked together. And
well, on that point, so we think about all the people that you've interviewed, and I'm sure you got a list of other folks that you want to reach out to. I understand that there's probably, in a lot of cases, a pretty decent relationship, but talk about times when there's not a good relationship. Is there little tricks to the trade in terms of you convincing them to be a part of the pod? Or, kind of talk about that. Like, number one, how do you identify the person? And then two, what are some kind of tricks of the trade to convincing them to come on if the relationship isn't there?
Gueric, that's your department.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's been tough. I mean, look, I've reached out to a ton of people that either have not responded or have come back and said, hey, look, sorry, I'm just either not interested or not the right time but I mean, for Courtney and I, we on a regular basis go, all right, let's think about people that would be interesting to talk to, right? That's how it's kind of starts to kind of go, or we also obviously get suggestions, right? Like Brian, you'll throw out some people as well, which is great. And it's gotten easier in terms of getting people's attention because now people kind of know the podcast, or we get kind of connected through somebody that's either been on or knows the podcast. But, earlier on, it's like, yeah, how do you reach out? And you're like, okay, here's what we do. And, I think most of the time when you're reaching out to somebody, if they go and they listen to one, or if they have a conversation with me about what it's all about, like, they get it in terms of like, yeah, we, at the end of the day, we want to talk about you. And I think you're a fascinating person and I want to hear about it. And I'm sure other people will too. And if it's a personality that's, you got a lot of personality in aviation, right? So if it's somebody that kind of likes to talk to people, they're great on podcasts, right? They'll be like, oh yeah, let me tell my story. Right. And so that's kind of, you get that connection. But it's, in some cases it's hard to, because people, some people are a little bit more humble and they're kind of like, why do you want to talk to me? Right. We've reached out to some people and they're like, why are you reaching out to me? And it's like, look at your background. Like, look at the things that you've done, the things that you're working on now. Right. I think that's really interesting. And so that's kind of how you get them to be like, oh, all right, yeah, that could be fun. And it's more like, hey, it's just a fun discussion. Right. And there is no, in the stuff that we do, there's no gotchas. Like, we're not trying to get somebody to say something that they shouldn't, or like, we're very aware of that, to be like, look, it's just a fun discussion about you and about the industry. We don't need any secrets. We don't need, and if you think you said something you shouldn't have, just let us know. We'll take it off. And so that puts people at ease, because then all of a sudden they're like, oh, yeah, I'm just going to talk, right? And who doesn't like to talk shop? Like, we go to conferences. That's just what people do. So let's just do it and record it, and it'll be fun.
It's people really connecting on their background and being intentional about it, right?
Yeah.
Sharing insight into the industry with you guys, talking, as you say, a little bit about shop and what they see in the marketplace. I guess pivoting from that, then, that's kind of like leadership and why people, or how people are selected and ultimately come on this show. How do you see leadership evolving? Right? You guys must see this a lot, because one thing I really appreciate about your podcast is you're going from the most senior levels in an organization with a wide variety of experience to some guests that are sort of, in the early stage of their upward ascent in their careers. What is that bridge that you see in terms of leadership challenges, especially in response to just the industry landscape where we are today?
Courtney, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so the gentleman who comes to mind first is recent, Steve Rimmer, right? So, I mean, Steve's been doing this for ages. He's clearly established. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he will fire you if you give him a spreadsheet, right?
Wonderful human being, too, by the way. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
No, he really is. He really is.
And so, like, I would consider that actually not typical of the people we have on the podcast, but the people we really enjoy to talk to. That generation that's drawing on experience and relationships so strongly, which you kind of naturally do. And there's also I think of people like Ron Anderson, like the nicest guy in aviation, who I'd never met before, and now I just one of the best guys. And I worked with Chris Jones for ages, and Andy Shanklin, and I mean, people who just can speak from experience without the need to tell you that they have that experience, if you know what I mean, right? There's there's an authenticity, and also, by the way, earned, right? So these are people who also have earned that I guess respect, for lack of a better word, so they don't have to tell people. It's a small industry. People know who Andy Shanklin is. People know who Tony Diaz is. These are people that we know and respect. And then the difference in, I guess, leadership style, I guess you're trading that experience for energy. And this isn't anything I think unique to aviation necessarily, but I think through some of the various guests, like there's just a lot of stuff that they have going on. So I think of David Sunday at Landline, who, by the way, and I hope he would agree with this, but he's kind of going through a bit of that transition as a successful entrepreneur, going from push, grind, and now he has Landline is, man, I saw the picture of like the 4 buses lined up at Terminal F in Philly, and I'm like, whoa, like they've made it. And he's starting to transition into exchanging that energy for experience and speaking. Other people would call it working smarter rather than working harder. I mean, when you have that experience, but and having known David for a while, I can really start to see and sense him transitioning into leaning more on his experience as opposed. I mean, he's one of the smartest guys in aviation, bar none. But that energy and that just pure drive to learn, he's now able to turn that into capital, both real capital, but also kind of leadership capital. Yeah. And that just continues, right? Until we get to the guys like Ron Anderson and Tony Diaz and Steve. And you definitely see that. I would argue that if you don't see that, they didn't make it in aviation. They went on and did something else. So there's some survivor bias there as well.
But David Sunday's a great example of an up-and-coming leader and somebody who really had an early vision and executed on it. And, I've been professionally blessed to have worked for 2 of the people that you mentioned. I think one of the things that has struck me about working for them and listening to people in your podcast is just how they invest in their own team. Right, as leaders. And what you often hear, I mean, Gueric was talking about, working with Tony Diaz and Courtney, you've mentioned some names, and I know David is equally worked with some of these people before, is, people are attracted to that. And that's a natural way to one, help build people up and really invest in young talent in the industry, whether or not they're with the firm or they go on to other companies, and ultimately they decide to stay in the industry. So one of the things that I'm always curious about, and maybe I'll start with Courtney and we can pivot over to Gueric, but, Courtney, you've got the website, you've got the newsletter, some of it's premium content, some of it's available to all the people that sign up for your email distribution. How do you decide, what's the process of what goes into this newsletter, this week or this day, or what you're thinking about? What's that actually just look like for you?
Show us the dartboard.
Yeah, you want to see behind the curtain, huh? So there's the there's what should probably be the proper answer, but then there's what actually happens. Quite frankly, in just how it works, Wednesday afternoon, I say, oh crap, I got to do a newsletter for tomorrow. No kidding. And I jump into something.
It's good strategic planning.
Let me start looking at stuff. Every once in a while through the week, there's been something that just various places we've looked for analysis that didn't quite kind of meet the level we were looking for. And that'll get drawn in. But by and large, Wednesday afternoon, okay, let me do some data exploration, see what I can find, come up with a chart. And it invariably leads to hours and hours of, whoa, that's interesting, and whoa, that's interesting, and out comes the chart. Every once in a while, or out comes 4 or 5 charts. Every once in a while, it is to the point where I'm like, look, my clients are investors, lessors, and airlines. And what I do, and what Gueric does as well, is we provide edge, right? So if it's a competitive edge, then that's premium. We provide that to our clients. Yeah. We do not, I get asked all the time, hey, can I get stuff for free? And I'm like, I'm kind of cheating the people who are clients if they're truly getting edge and a different way of thinking. So I try to separate it that way. One, I just kind of asked, would any of my clients be upset if I gave this away for free? Anything more on the airline side, if it's more kind of public focused. So the stuff going on with Southwest is very big and newsworthy. With Spirit's very big and newsworthy. We're not talking aircraft markets and stuff. That tends to go into the newsletter. Just stuff that I'm interested in, and things like that. And that's how it's. I wish there was a better, more defined process for that. But I try to spend as little time as possible on the newsletter, and I fail every time because it's always just so interesting. We stumble into something.
Is it I'm going to go back to the edges. Is it on the edge of aviation that interests you the most, or is it really deep inside of it? Meaning like, a particular situation, or for example, one of them you were talking about, the recession potentially coming on, right? It's not directly related inside aviation, but it definitely impacts it. I mean, or is it literally just change week to week where it's interesting this week?
Yeah.
Next week.
That's the answer. Right.
Okay.
The answer is both deep in aviation and on the edges, right? So recession stuff. In the research in the Aircraft Intelligence Monthly, we'll look at, we've looked at things like hotel rooms and shipping container yields, right? Because those directly affect the aircraft market, even, to Gueric's involvement, and he's, a lot of his values are in each of these publications, how that affects aircraft values. And I kind of consider those on the fringes and most interesting. Some people would call it alternative data, but it's kind of that, right? I am not an economist. So anytime we're kind of looking at recessionary stuff, this is more, hey, I've kind of been learning about this. I'm kind of interested in what this might mean. And it seems like there's some room for not necessarily misunderstanding, but, just like we saw during COVID, where all the models blew up. Everything that we knew just kind of ceased to exist, and all the models had to be rebuilt. There are pockets of that all over in macroeconomics, in looking at McDonald's revenue lately, like just to counter my newsletter from last week that talked about the SOM rule that always predicts a recession and didn't predict a recession this time, per Claudius Somm, who created the SOM rule. Now I'm looking at, McDonald's revenue does not look so hot, and we're hearing warnings out of Subway, right? What does that mean? For aviation, what could that possibly mean, right? Nothing. But there's this economic kind of angle there. It's that competing, right? I'm not making conclusions. It's, wait a minute. Hey, on one hand, I'm seeing this. On the other hand, I'm seeing this. And then I just get a bunch of hate mail in between. So it's fun.
And I guess to pivot that a little bit then, Gueric, I mean, do you, I guess, does Courtney's information and what he produces, does that inform your views on a more forward-looking basis, right? Not so much on the appraiser side, but when clients are approaching you and asking for your insight and guidance on values and where we are in the market, is how much of it is more of a collaborative nature and how much of it is just kind of forward thinking and putting views out there?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's one of the reasons that kind of attracted me to what the stuff that Courtney does, right? Because it's all of a sudden part of being an appraiser is trying to figure out what's going to make things, values go up or down, what's going to make the market tick, which is one of the things that I really love about my job. So getting his insight in terms of have you, I was looking at this before and this was an interesting trend. And I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? And then you start talking about it and you're like,
why would you do that?
Yeah. I'm like, well, yeah, right.
I saw a YouTube video.
And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait a minute, right? And it makes you think about, I wonder if this will affect this region, this aircraft type, the supply, it all comes back down to supply and demand. But it makes you think about how is that going to affect things. And so that's why, we went from in summer 21 of talking about, narrow body, shortage. We started talking about that because we started seeing that. And, it was through our discussions to be like, there's something there. That's weird. Something's going to happen there, to then move into, a year and a half later to be like, which I believe I started talking about it. I'm just going to put it out there. But it was like, we might go into a wide body shortage, right? And sure enough, 23, we started seeing that. Yeah. But all these little things. And then, that's when we kind of look at today to kind of go, based on all the stuff that Courtney's doing, you kind of go, all right, so everybody's talking about this big shortage, right? Oh my God, the aircraft market is great. It's fantastic. And then Courtney starts looking at stuff and he goes, I don't know. I think we might be in an oversupply in a couple of years. And you're like, what? That's crazy. And then he starts throwing charts out there and you're like, that's interesting.
Right? On these areas
that's the name for the next podcast. Huh. Well, that's interesting.
On those areas, though, where there's a bit of contrarian thought, do you guys find yourself debating more and just beating it up to make sure that you're a little bit more thoughtful in it? Or is it you guys kind of get the hook and you're like, there's no way this is wrong. It's all there. Now we just need to craft the narrative and start convincing people of what we're seeing.
There's definitely a lot of back and forth. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of back and forth, right? Because it's not like he says, I think this is going to happen, and I'm like, oh, absolutely, you're absolutely right. It's more like, what?
No, that's exactly how it goes down.
I'm like, no, you're like, what are you smoking? What rabbit hole have you gone down? And then you just kind of go back and forth, and you kind of go, oh, well, actually, you know what? Yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? And you kind of, so because to be out there and to put stuff out that's big picture stuff, you got to be sure, right?
The thing that I appreciate most is contrarian thought, well thought out contrarian thought. But I know that comes at a price, that you're going to get pushback, you're going to get resistance because it's in opposition of, kind of the trend or the herd mentality. And so how do you guys manage that? How do you think about, because I'm sure it comes in, right? I mean, Courtney, you joke around hate mail, but I'm sure some of the stuff that you published has not been met with open arms, that people have pushed back and said, you got this wrong. I mean, what kind of keeps you guys going and willing to kind of push the edge and do that kind of contrarian, communication?
Well, look, I used to lead a union committee for a local union that had recently come off strike. So when I say hate mail, in the context of that, this is all easy peasy. So it's not, we're not getting actual hate mail. But, probably the worst ones are, hey, just some friendly advice. You probably shouldn't say that there's a narrow body shortage coming. Or you probably shouldn't say, while we're furloughing pilots, that there's a pilot shortage coming. I totally get why. I thank you for the advice. I totally get it. But we think it could happen. So what contrarian is, and I've been very careful to define it internally, because it's very easy to think that to be a contrarian, you just say the opposite of whatever's being said. And you're not going to last very long doing that, right? I mean, that's actually quite easy. By and large, the direction that most of our conversations go, one of two ways most often. Gueric will call me, or I will call him. So for instance, I'll say, hey, I don't know a ton about engines on the technical side. So I'll call Gueric and I'll say, hey, I think engines are going to be expensive to maintain. And he'll go, yeah, no kidding, dude. Like, we're already there. Tossed. Like, no interest. Okay, like, it's not anything worth doing analysis on. Something I learned, like, that's really interesting. And bounce off Gueric, and Gueric's like, yeah, dude, welcome to 2024. Like where have you been? Or the other way that it goes is, I'll call Gueric and be like, hey, what do you think about this? And he'll be like, doesn't work, and here's why. And I'll be like, it does, and here's why. And then a couple hours later, by and large, it doesn't work, or it's not built up enough. There's not enough substance there. It's the rare times, and we do get better at it because we have the conversations, not just between us two, but with you, with other people around the industry. You can start to we know where to aim to more likely hit something.
Nice.
Yeah. Right. And that's the contrarian stuff. It's not that we're saying the opposite. It's, hey, we think this is being missed. And in order to find that, you got to go through 10 stuff to find one. And that's the process, how it gets there.
It's not so much that it's all contrarian, right? It's like, here's the stuff we find interesting, and here's something that might have legs to it, right? In the industry or in the future, or something we're seeing now.
Or, and I'll give another example, right? So remember, the idea here isn't to just be contrarian. The idea here is to find edge, a different way of looking at the market that is going to give lessors, investors, airlines, an edge over the other competitors. That edge may be, hey, we don't think things are going to change for a little bit. What did we put in the AIM about a month and a half ago? We said, hey, kind of looks like September, the Fed, based on kind of what the things they do in the past, we're not experts on this, but from our perspective, the pressure on the Fed to lower rates in the fall is much higher. You should not be listening to two guys from aviation about what the U.S. Federal Reserve will or will not do. Sure. But it's important and interesting in the context of aviation and why we think that and what it might mean. And we kind of go, and a lot of the forecasting is like this. It's not, hey, this will happen at this point. It's if this, then this. Be ready. So when that inflection point happens, there's almost like a roadmap. Like, whoa, wait a minute. Now we know kind of the way that this might play out. I have no idea what the Fed will do. I'm no Fed whisperer or anything. And we don't focus on that often. But that would have a big impact on an aviation market that has been waiting for interest rate cuts for a very long time, expecting them earlier, and it's now another data point towards kind of competitive edge for us to add to that voice to say, based on what we're looking at from an aviation perspective, we think that the Fed may be seeing intense pressure for this fall.
Yeah. Well, I will, to add to that, right? I mean, a lot of those conversations will lead to, so if the Fed drops rates by X amount, right? It's not going to be a quarter point. It's probably going to be like half, maybe a little more, right? Then you start thinking, what does that do to like trading activity for aviation?
Yeah.
Right. And then we start going, oh, should we look at that, like the historical analysis on that to figure out what's the trend? And that, then it leads to like, oh, okay, so let's look at that. What does that look like? Is that interesting? And then if it shows a decent trend, then you try tying that to, so what does that do to values or lease rates, right? And does that have any correlation where it looks like something that's interesting? And that's how you kind of evolve into some of the stuff that we put out there, is because it's just kind of like one thing you start going, how does that going to impact, this and this? And then for both of us, we then also look at, okay, well, this is the near-term impact. What about like 3 years from now or 5 years from now? Like, what does that look like? And is there anything we can look at to kind of also try to portray and see, hey, based on what we know, we think this may happen in the future too. Like, there's some similarity. So like, and that's where I think the edge comes from, is by doing the analysis and not just regurgitating what other people are talking about, right? That's one thing that we don't do. We're not a news publication, right? We don't put out news. Yeah. We do research, right? Because at the end of the day, there's so much, news and webinars and that ultimately say the same thing over and over again. Like, that's, two people, we can't compete with that. So how do we get edge? Is by doing the stuff that nobody's really looking at. And then that's where our customers really appreciate that, because then they're like, oh, we hadn't thought about that. And like, if one of our customers tells us that,
that's the stuff.
We won. Oh, that's that's all it takes.
Good.
Yeah, I had never thought about
Courtney's
that.
the role model podcaster. Yeah,
yeah,
I can see it now.
Who's the drug dealer now, huh?
So it's yeah.
That's a great podcast name.
Who's the drug dealer?
Who's the drug dealer now?
As you look back on your careers, what do you wish you had known when you first started in the aviation industry?
To be honest with you, when I started, I had in my head there was no way I was going to be an entrepreneur. Then it wasn't like, oh yeah, you've got this. Like, this is what I want to. I want to have my own business. It was more like, no, I'm going to work for people, and then like I'm hoping that I can like be CEO of a company or do something, right? Do something, get higher up. Never did I ever like think, oh yeah, I'm going to start my own company. And now that I've been doing this for 16 years, I wouldn't do anything else, right? Having to work for other people is, there's pros and cons to everything, right? And I'm not like putting down working for somebody, because there's a lot of benefits there. I mean, not having, people around to talk to on a regular basis, not having the resources. There's so many things that you're just kind of like, yeah, you lack that when you're working on your own. But then you also have the flexibility of, doing stuff with my family when I need to. Also, I get to work with whoever I want. I get to kind of put out whatever I want in terms of like, if I want to come up with a new product or, so there's a lot of freedom there. But, I think one of the things that I wish I would have spent more time learning about is how to make it not just me. I think that's one thing that I lack, and I've talked about over the years, and I'm sure people are sick of hearing me, say, oh yeah, I'm looking at hiring somebody at some point. Like, I've never done it. Right. And I ultimately, like, to be honest, I don't know how good of a boss I would actually be. I'm good on my own, but actually having no, but it's true. Right. And it's kind of, because it's one thing to be an entrepreneur. It's another thing to be a boss. Or to be a leader.
Sure. It's a different skill set, right?
Yeah, exactly.
A management perspective and a leadership perspective, and from a time perspective, right?
Yeah.
It's not just you that you're investing in and setting that vision for.
Yeah, and so I think that based on that, right? I think to be a successful entrepreneur is having that more well-rounded understanding of what it takes to grow a business, right? And I think that. For anybody that is looking at doing that, it's take the risk. Absolutely. Right. Because if you believe in what you can do, take the risk, right? Go out there and do it. And if you are true to yourself, you're true to your customers, you treat them well, you provide a quality product, right? People will come back to you. That's what I've learned. Like, over the years.
So let me push you on that though. What's held you back from hiring somebody?
I know Courtney's.
This isn't supposed to be hard.
Yeah.
What's with these hard questions?
Easy there, Courtney. You're next. Quiet down. Answer the question.
I think it's the challenge of managing people, right?
Yeah.
Because you hear all kinds of stories, right? In terms of, I mean, it's one thing to find the right people to work with. It's another to finding the right people. And what if you don't? And dealing with that. And so all of a sudden now you're spending a lot of time managing people to do work for you that ultimately probably don't want to do work for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to figure out, how do I do less work? And I want more for it. Like, you just hear a lot of stories. And so that kind of gives you that sense of like, all right, if it's, it's not like you've got a, company with like 100 people. It's like, if it's just 2 people or 3 people, it adds a lot more stress to that. And then all of a sudden you have the responsibility of, well, you've got to make sure that you are there for those people, whether it be financially or, kind of emotionally as well, trying to, be a good leader and trying to get them to evolve. And so there's a lot to it, right? And so
Sure.
I think for me, it's been easier not to have to deal with that. And I haven't had really the problems of, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed all the time. I need somebody, right? Yeah, of course, there's times where, and it'll come to a big surprise to probably all of you, where I do work, more than a couple of hours a day.
Control C, Control V. Oh, Control Z. Oops. Control C, Control V. So that increases your workload by 50%.
There you go. Yeah. See, but it does actually. You made the point. Work smarter, not harder. That's one thing that is also, I think, key to success in any role, really, and especially as an entrepreneur, is trying to find the ways that, like, okay, so how do you know what you need to do? How do you do that in a much easier fashion so that you can get it outdoor, you can get it to the customer in a more efficient way, so that you're not spending, you're not reinventing the wheel every time you got to do something, right? That's key as well.
How you invest your time.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I've appreciated about you and our friendship over the years is how much time, and I don't know how many people realize this, but how much time you really give to friends and to industry connections and really make yourself available. At the same time, with the personal commitments and running your own business. And I know some of your business, particularly as it relates to transactions in the capital markets, that can be really demanding and take up a lot of time in a very short period of time. So that says a lot about you, I think, is in your character.
Yeah, which, I mean, look, I always look at that as, at the end of the day, I always learn something, right? Yeah. So, of course, I'm happy to help somebody, right? And it's also, I don't have the mentality of like, as soon as you want my time, it's going to cost you something, right? Mm-hmm. I don't like, somebody calls me up and says, hey, you know what? Can I get what's it going to cost me to get 2 values? You just want, what do you need? Like a little spreadsheet? Like if you want something that's formal that you need to use for, it's got to have a signature, there's different things. But if it's I
Sure.
just need to know, yeah, here you go. I'm not going to be like, well, that's going to be $100.
Yeah. You know that everybody's going to be calling you up asking you for 2 values now.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's the limit.
3, baby.
Yeah, I just need one. You said 2. I just need 2. And I'll do 2 tomorrow. And 2 next day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do we have all these people from the same company emailing asking me for 2?
Yeah, that's right. No, but look, and that's been my mentality all along is I'm always happy to help somebody because at the end of the day, if they have a good enough project, hopefully they'll call me, right? And versus, oh, you know what? Every time I call Gueric, it costs me something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know what? It's at the end of the day. Yeah, right? So it works. And some people take advantage, right? And at some point, you have to, that's the other part of being a good entrepreneur is kind of knowing when do you cut off certain people to be like, look, I don't mind helping you a couple of times, but when it's all the time, at some point, I do have to get paid for my time because I know it's ultimately helping you as well, and it's on a regular basis, right? And so it's kind of defining that.
That all goes back to what you said earlier in terms of investing in your customers, kind of maintaining those relationships, and it's that whole, I know I can't remember the phrase that you used, but it's
hard work.
Investing in your clients and stuff. So that all makes sense. What about you, Courtney? If you had to look back and you had to tell the younger Courtney, hey, don't do that. That's a bad idea. Or no, go do that. That's you're gonna love that.
Listen, I've got a whole list of examples just from this morning. Like I wish I could just go back and be like, don't eat that muffin.
Don't pick up the phone when Gueric calls.
Don't resist arrest.
So, I mean, we were joking that I didn't read through the show notes. I never do with any of our guests. That's actually on purpose. That's actually one of the things that I've realized that I've kind of learned about myself. I come from a very small town. There were only 50 kids in my graduating class. And the entire time growing up, I just remember all of our teachers saying, like, wow, when you get out in the real world, like, it's going to be hard. You're going to have to, you're going to be, it's a phrase I've used in a speech I give, you're going to be a small fish in a big pond. They're just going to eat you up. And the whole first half of my career, retrospectively looking back on that now, I realized was myself trying to work to be as good as. And I was asked to give the graduation speech in 2019 to go back. I graduated 20 years and I didn't know what to talk about. And one of the really what I talked about was that was all bullshit. Like, I wish so much earlier that I would have leaned into all these great assets and skills that I learned just out of necessity. They're very different, but that's the whole point. And so the idea of, instead of just intense preparation, I just lean into the authenticity. I wish I would have done that earlier. And I always kind of did because I didn't like to prepare. It was hard. But I think knowing now, and just like anybody who gets older and progresses through their career, these aren't things that you can just offer as advice. Things that you have to learn. But I can honestly 100% say, I mean, this was 2019. I started my company in 2020, but for the first time, I really sat and thought about, okay, what would I tell these kids coming out of this school? And I actually believed it myself, and it changed my whole outlook on just kind of how I work. And I realized that what I was trying to overcome is a huge asset. It's to be different. We had to learn how to do everything because, I mean, if the sink broke, the next town was an hour away. You knew the plumber. That was Bob down the street. Bob was an okay plumber, right? But so you didn't really want to call Bob. So you gave the plumbing, a shot yourself type of thing.
I thought Bob.
And so
was
I learned
baggage.
how to learn. And I spent the first half of my career trying to compensate for that. And I wish I never would have. I wish I would have had the confidence to appreciate and understand what were assets that I thought were liabilities I was trying to work my way out of. I think that would probably be... and the other thing, too, now I've always done this, but this is key for me. Again, not many people know this, but if you're introverted, find an extrovert to hang out with. Hitch your wagon to an extrovert. For me, a friend in college, and then while I was in Cincinnati, it was Tony Romano at Bombardier among a bunch of people, and it's Gueric, right? Among other people, there's always somebody who, by the way, you can't just trick them into it. They kind of, in order to do that, you kind of gotta show them your dark side a little bit. Be like, hey, look, all that stuff they say about me, it turns out it's really not all that true. And the ones who hang around, those are the ones that are the good ones. Either they're that loyal and great working and just amazing friends that you want to actually spend your professional life working with, or they're too stupid to figure it out and you can just steamroll them anyway.
What?
Either way, I win.
Yeah.
That's inspiration. Pay it forward to I win.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean, on that, maybe let's close with a thought on leadership, which is, if there's one message you'd like to leave your listeners with about leadership and innovation, these are, I think, our broad themes we've talked about on this podcast. What would it be?
Go for it, Gueric. Be a leader.
I would say don't be afraid to be outspoken. In terms of don't be afraid to be out there and tell people what you think, right? I mean, obviously don't. It's one of those where you just don't walk around and just say stupid stuff all the time just because. But I think that's one thing that I found about, whether you're in a company, you're at a conference, you're in a networking event, whatever it is, right? If you've got something that you want to say that you think is interesting, say it, right? And because that to me gets you the attention of others that are going to be like, oh yeah, well, that's interesting. Oh, that's a good, and that, that allows you to then create relationships where people are like, yeah, you know what? We should hang out with this person. We should be more, we should pay more attention to this person because they have things that they're willing to say, and doesn't mean that you're going to be right all the time, or it doesn't mean that somebody's not going to be like, yeah, you know what? I disagree with you because of X, Y, and Z. That's okay too, right? Because you learn from that, right? And that to me is kind of, yeah, you have to just put yourself out there. And it takes a while, right? Because ultimately, you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I don't want to ask this question. People are going to think it's a stupid question. But, or make a comment. But at the end of the day, you just say it. And 9 times out of 10, other people are thinking it. And that I think gets you a long way. And it also shows initiative. I think, and that's what it takes ultimately to be a leader as well, right? Is to kind of take the initiative to put yourself out there and be a thought leader and stuff. And I think the other part that I would say from a leadership standpoint is, surround yourself with good, smart, intelligent people, or people in the know. And, when I think about ever since I was little, I've always been around people that are typically smarter than I am. Because I think it's so interesting, right? Because you learn so much from other people. And if you can surround yourself with people like that on a regular basis, you're always learning, right? You're never just sitting there like, oh God, these people don't have anything to say. And it's great because then you have great discussions, you learn more stuff, and then from that standpoint, you're learning as well. So then you seem smarter to other people. And that's my trick. Right. I learn from everybody else, and then I regurgitate what other people tell me, and I'm like, and people are like, wow, that was great, Gueric. I'm like, hey, thanks. So, but yeah, those would be my few things.
And it's so important, right? What the people you surround yourself with and what you consume, right? Just in terms of information in those discussions.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the key things for, why I created the Fine Fellows of Aviation, right? When you think back, that was 2016. That was one of the key things, right? I was like, wouldn't it be interesting to have people that are in the know in the industry to talk about what's going on in the industry, right? Yeah. And that's what created that, and it's worked out so well.
Courtney, how about you?
Gueric took mine.
Yes.
Well, look, but I think to expand on that, I had several of my team members come to me in the past and say, how do you do that? How do you just fit into a conversation, which I've never been able to do? But if it's an intellectual academic conversation, it becomes actually an introverted exercise. But my answer to him was always, well, just do it. Right? It's like learning a foreign language. The only way to really learn it is to actually do it. And you're going to say stupid things. And I think that's the part that I would add on. Know how to be wrong. I think of one of the smartest guys in aviation, and to be frank, I couldn't pick a time that he's actually ever been wrong. But I think of Shannon Ackert, right? This guy who I mean, he's just so interested in discovery, So much so that he wrote white papers for no other reason than he knew he would learn more from it. Yet somehow I know
forward with his website,
right, absolutely,
and what he's done in publishing those things. Yeah, sure.
Yet somehow I know, I can't think of any example, and I'm sure it's happened. Somehow I know if he was wrong about something, and you said, Shannon, I don't think that's right. I think it's this. He would be excited because he learned something new, right? Like, I love hanging out with people like that. People love to hang out with people like that. The goal of leadership is the objective, not just the idea of leadership. That's kind of obvious. Be a leader, not a boss. We see it on LinkedIn every other day. But I would then kind of go one step further and really say, well, nobody talks about reaching that. Very few people talk about reaching the objective, but they talk about the people that they worked with. They talked about the team. They talk about the small wins, believe it or not. All the conversations I have are always about these little small wins. Hey, remember that time I got yelled at in a meeting and you stood up for me? No. But they sure did. Or remember that time we all had a great time as a team? And if you consider just the act of building an amazing team as the objective, it reframes kind of what you're doing. And what you'll find is if that is now your actual objective, as a leader, what the team achieves tends to hit that objective and then exceed it. In my experience, it's tricky. That's part of the experience, part of leadership, as opposed to what you can read in a textbook as well, which gets back to Gueric's response. Dang it, quit asking him first. He gets like the first draft picks, right? Like he's going, this is like Family Feud where, they're like, name an animal of the feline family. And he's like, cat. And then what am I left with?
Well, one, we want to keep this podcast under 3 hours. So, that's part of it's strategic, but I think one of the things that's always stuck with me, Courtney, is kind of the opposite to your answer, which is, helping people be right. And what's always stuck with me is earlier in my career when I worked at Intrepid Aviation, I had a mutual colleague of ours, Courtney, who left and ultimately ended up working with you at Bombardier. And the time you invested in really helping guide this professional's career, making sure that they had the right experience, that they met the right people, that they got to work on the right presentations. I think that's leadership, right? And I think that says a lot about you. You talk about the small wins, and I think that these are probably incrementally small wins, but ultimately guided, this person's career exponentially and putting them on a roadmap to success.
Awesome. Good. Yeah. I'm glad to hear that.
And so to the flip side of that, if I may, I'm going to counter that.
I need to talk to you, Gueric. That reminds me.
Another podcast, The Flip Side?
Yeah, the flip side. Oh, there you go. The flip side. Yeah. No, I mean, look, to me as a leader, right, I think you should want to see your people succeed, right? You should, to me, like if you're a good leader and you have somebody that you've guided, that's worked for you, then it ends up being the CEO of another, like that has that much success, like that you should be thrilling, right? Should be like, wow, that's fantastic because I was part of that, right? Versus I don't want to put too much guidance in this person because then they're going to want to take my job. Right. At the end of the day, like as a leader, you should be like, everybody should want my job or a job like it. Right. You should strive to that.
There's a great example of this. When I hired Jim Morrison, the question I got as we were deciding whether or not we should hire Jim at Bombardier, the question that was asked me was, they said, Courtney, are you okay working for this guy? And I said, he's going to work for me, right? And they said, no, look, he's good. Are you okay working for him? Yeah. You know what? Yeah, I am. He's great. Hire him. And he was great. Of course, Jim. And
Jim's
of course, we're all friends with Jim now, and he's killing it. And
an incredible career.
But the lesson for me, and it was actually from Jerome Chung, who I've mentioned several times, a great mentor of mine. who epitomized, like, his career objective was to make other people to make other people as successful as he could. And again, that man, you just luck out with some of the people that you work with and for over the span of your career. And I guess it's just picking the right ones to emulate for the right reasons.
Brian, are you really you want to end this here? Because I want to do the lightning round.
All right, let's do the lightning round.
Oh God!
All right.
We'll
Let's
make
do
sure-
it.
You know what? I'm going to go with Courtney. I'm going to go with Courtney first because I know he didn't look at anything. So I want immediate answers right out of the gate.
Continue
All right.
the show notes.
All right. You ready? Like, I just want straightforward answers, right?
Oh.
Favorite aircraft?
CRJ 700 because I flew it.
Lame.
Window seat or aisle?
Oh, window. Don't you ever ask me that question again. I will slap you so hard.
Favorite airline?
Oh, that one's tough.
Alive or dead? It can be anything.
Comair.
Favorite
Just knew
airport?
it. Favorite airport? Jeez, woof.
Woof.
I miss...
Brian, you're going to have to help me. What's
Yeah.
WOF?
WOF. Love flying in. So okay, listen. I'm gonna say this isn't the right answer, but it's a quick answer. O'Hare, because only at every other airport in the world, you land on the runway on tower frequency. You taxi
key.
off the runway, you stop, and you contact ground, and ground tells you where to go. At O'Hare, you pull off the runway and you taxi to your gate. You listen to see if ground ever calls you. Don't you dare stop in Chicago. If you stop in Chicago, they will yell at you. Awesome place. And it'll do it in a Chicago accent. It's so amazing.
And you know why it's ORD?
Orchard.
Nice. Very good. That
They
wasn't
don't
the
have
question.
accents in Chicago either.
Favorite travel destination?
Connecticut.
No, come on. I know that.
That is
Even
a
I know that one.
Nice.
I'm on my way to Hawaii again. I'll throw Hawaii out there.
I would have said that for you.
Favorite movie or documentary related aviation?
Man,
Man, it sucks not preparing, huh?
yeah, it sure does. I wish I wish
Just
I
wait
had
till you
some-
hear my answers.
but
Don't
my
worry, you're
aviation-
authentic.
Oh, yeah.
Yours is next.
Listen, I'll throw out airplane.
No,
One or two. One. You're talking one, right?
One.
man. Yeah, you really cut him
And
off
lastly,
guard.
favorite book, aviation length.
Oh, aviation related book.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's only one right answer.
That one's easy. Hard landing.
Yeah. Yeah. That
Gueric.
is like the great.
God.
That's like
That's
the Bible
right.
for
The Bible,
for
yeah.
app geeks.
Yes.
Lightning round for Gueric. Favorite
Okay.
aircraft.
No.
But does
Yeah,
it
it's
have to be a commercial airplane?
No.
You can do whatever you want, man.
I
It's your
would,
time on wing.
that's my time
the
on
power
wing.
card. That's the power
So,
card. Does it
I
have to be
would say-
commercial?
I would say either the Corsair or the Phantom. Those are two of my favorites on the military side. It's very cool.
Whoa, the
airplanes.
Corsair. Are we talking the F4U? Like the World War II Corsair with the
yeah.
gold wing?
Yep.
Good answer.
Yeah, I love that airplane.
Window or aisle?
Aisle.
This is either complimentary or we can never do a podcast together again. I can't
Yeah.
decide
See,
which.
but to me that
why-
question should be tied to when you eat
Is the
wings.
window-
Do you
is-
like the wing or do you like the drum? And then if he says drum and I say wing, then you know it's working. Otherwise,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It works for you guys. Don't
As
judge.
long as there's nobody in the middle.
Favorite airline?
You know what? Put him down for Skybus.
Sky Bus?
Columbus,
airline.
Ohio, A319.
You know,
Oh,
so
World capital, Columbus, Ohio.
I haven't traveled on enough different airlines to be honest to be like, oh, you know what, this was like better service than.
you may not be
So-
welcome in Atlanta when you try to
Yeah,
fly there.
right. I mean,
Next question. Favorite airport?
oh, it's got to be
There's
Atlanta.
Don't really
There's-
answer that. You
yeah,
can't
there's only
answer
one
that. You
right
have no
It's
idea.
got to be Atlanta. I'm going to say Atlanta. Yeah, absolutely, all the way.
There it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Favorite travel destination? You want to go Atlanta on that too? Just back to back?
I think yeah. You know, I mean, yeah. Unless it's like is there a Paris, Georgia? Because
Probably.
I don't know. Paris.
Texas,
I
do that.
think it would be one of my favorite travel destinations, Paris. So,
Movie or documentary? Aviation related.
With aviation.
What's up there?
So, what's the Die Hard where they're at the airport? Is it 3?
Die Hard 2.
2?
2.
I think that's yeah. I mean, there's so many things wrong with that movie. It's awesome.
If you didn't know which one it was, how could it be your favorite?
Because I knew it wasn't 1, and I wasn't sure if it was 2 or 3. But it's definitely, yeah. I like it.
I like to change
to go
my
watch
answer.
that.
So to be honest, I don't have any like aviation books. That's one of the things that the car enthusiast in me kind of shies me away from aviation books. Like I'd rather read car stuff than aviation books. So sorry, I don't have a favorite one.
All right.
Yeah.
I gotta ask both of you. I'm gonna keep with this. What profession, other than something aviation related, outside the aviation industry, would you guys like to attempt? And nothing to do with aviation. What would you do?
You know that guy that puts his head inside the lion's mouth? Not that.
Good choice, Courtney.
Yeah, not that.
Not that one.
Yeah, not that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to get life insurance, and it's tough. My dad was a teacher. My wife was a teacher. I think I naturally would have been a teacher, and I would have enjoyed myself for sure.
What about you, Gueric?
Exotic car sales. That's
exotic car sales.
Yeah.
I thought you were saying exotic animal sales. Tomato, tomato.
Exotic dancer. Exotic dancer.
Exotic dancer. I heard exotic dancer, Brian. I think you. Yeah. Okay.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I think this is a good time to end it. This has been really insightful. I think I've appreciated just the level of candor that you shared on a little bit about your personal history, how you guys collaborate together, your management and leadership insights. And I really enjoyed it. It's great to be able to share a side that I think David and I know well of you with others and hopefully with your listeners who maybe don't get to see this on a regular basis.
Yeah, thanks for having us on our own podcast.
Yeah, that's right. It's always great to talk about us.
Very considerate. Yeah, this is my podcast, bitches.
The football stadium, right? They decided to put this like high-end turf in, like eco turf with coconut shells and stuff. Storm comes in, destroys all of it. What do?
Put a new one down.
Coconut shells. What just happened yesterday?
Destroyed all of it. Oh my god.
Yeah,
you can blame anybody, but it's not the asphalt.
Oh god. Wow. That hurt a little bit.
It's the coconut's fault.